I'm Audrey Mills, 32, barricading my childhood bedroom door with a dresser. Downstairs, Ryan's words still echo. She's completely fucking crazy. Mom's face twisted with horror as she dialed 911, whispering I was dangerous and having an episode. Now sirens wail closer. My trembling hands stuff evidence into a hollowed-out copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. They had no idea what would happen if the truth got out. What times he times would do to all of us. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear more stories of family betrayal and the fight for justice. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. 10 years. That's how long I'd managed to stay away from Millfield. 10 years building a life for myself in Boston as an investigative journalist, exposing corruption in city politics and corporate fraud. 10 years of holiday phone calls and occasional visits to neutral locations. 10 years of freedom from the suffocating weight of family secrets. Until 3 weeks ago, when my editor killed my biggest story and exposé on a pharmaceutical company's deadly cover-up after mysterious pressure from upstairs. 2 days later, I was called into HR. Budget cuts. Position eliminated. A generous severance package with an ironclad NDA. You can stay with us until you figure things out, Mom had said when I called with the news. Her voice a practiced blend of sympathy and satisfaction. Patricia Mills, community pillar and master of maintaining appearances, finally getting her wayward daughter back under her roof. The familiar scent of lemon, furniture, polish, and hidden vodka hit me as I dragged my suitcases through the front door. The house looked exactly the same: floral wallpaper, family photos with forced smiles, crystal figurines that no one was allowed to touch. Audrey, honey, you look exhausted. Mom swept into the foyer, assessing me from head to toe. Have you lost weight? Not in a good way. And your hair, we should make you an appointment with Sharon. I accepted her awkward hug, noting how she held her body away from mine. Hi, Mom. Thanks for letting me stay. Of course, sweetie. Family takes care of family. The word sounded rehearsed, like a line from one of her beloved Hallmark movies. Ryan and Melissa are coming for dinner with little Lily. They're so excited to see you. That night, seated at the dining table where I'd spent countless silent meals as a teenager, I watched my brother dominate the conversation. Ryan had always been the golden child high school football star turned successful local businessman. His construction company had flourished over the past decade, landing all the major contracts in town. Fletcher Investments is planning another development on the old mill property, Ryan announced, slicing into his pot roast. 30 luxury condos and a marina. My company got the build. That's wonderful, honey, Mom beamed, refilling her wine glass for the third time. Howard has been so good to this town. I noticed how Melissa, Ryan's petite blonde wife, kept her eyes on her plate. When she reached for her water glass, the sleeve of her cardigan pulled back, revealing purplish marks on her wrist. What happened to your arm, Melissa? I asked. The table went silent. Melissa tugged her sleeve down. Oh, clumsy me. Bumped into a door frame carrying laundry. Ryan's laugh sounded forced. She's always been clumsy. Remember when we first started dating, babe? You fell up the stairs at the movies. Mommy has an owl, piped up 7-year-old Lily, her dark curls bouncing. It's purple and blue. Lily, eat your vegetables, Ryan said sharply. That night, I couldn't sleep in my old bedroom. The walls seemed to close in, memories seeping from the floral wallpaper like a slow poison. Around 2 a.m., I heard voices from across the hall, Ryan's old room, now used for storage. You need to control yourself. My brother's harsh whisper carried through the thin walls. A female voice, Melissa's, responded too quietly for me to make out the words. If you'd just stop pushing back, this wouldn't happen, Ryan hissed. Then silence, followed by muffled sobbing. The next morning, as I unpacked my laptop and notebooks, I found an old newspaper clipping that must have been mixed in with my things during a previous visit. The yellowed paper showed a smiling, middle-aged man cutting a ribbon in front of a new building. The caption read, Howard Fletcher, CEO of Fletcher Investments, opens new community center. Donation marks businessman's continued commitment to Millfield's growth. Something about Fletcher's smile made my journalistic instincts tingle too perfect, too practiced, like a mask carefully worn. Later that afternoon, I overheard Mom and Ryan in the kitchen. Their voices low but intense. "She's already asking questions," Ryan said. "About Melissa, about Fletcher." "She's always been too curious for her own good," Mom replied. "We need to handle Audrey carefully. Make sure she doesn't cause trouble." "I'll talk to her," Ryan promised. "Remind her that she's the one who left. She doesn't understand how things work here anymore." I backed away silently, my heart pounding. 10 years away, and nothing had changed, except maybe it had gotten worse. The Millfield Morning Press hadn't changed much. Same brick building, same faded awning, same coffee stain on the carpet just inside the door. What had changed was my old friend Stephanie Jackson, now with streaks of premature gray in her dark hair and a wariness in her eyes that hadn't been there in high school. "Audrey Mills," she said, smiling as she emerged from behind a filing cabinet. "The prodigal journalist returns." We hugged, and for a moment, I felt 16 again, Stephanie and I staying late at the school newspaper, dreaming of Pulitzers and exposing corruption. "I'm just the archivist now," she explained, gesturing to the rows of filing cabinets and digital scanning equipment. "The actual reporting jobs keep disappearing. We're down to 3 full-time journalists." "Who owns the paper now?" I asked, remembering the independent family operation it had once been. Stephanie's smile tightened. "Subsidiary of Fletcher Media Group. Howard Fletcher bought it 5 years ago, along with the radio station and local news website." She lowered her voice. "He owns pretty much everything now. The shopping center, the riverfront, half the residential developments. And my brother's construction company has the contracts for all of it?" She nodded. "Ryan's done very well for himself." Very well. The way she said it made it clear there was more to the story. Over the next few hours, Stephanie helped me access public records on Fletcher's business dealings. The pattern was unmistakable wherever Fletcher investments appeared. Local officials miraculously cleared regulatory hurdles. Environmental concerns disappeared. Zoning restrictions were modified. Tax incentives materialized. "What about the police department?" I asked. Stephanie's fingers paused over the keyboard. "Chief Wallace was appointed 4 years ago. First act was requesting new vehicles. Fletcher Automotive, Howard's brother's dealership, supplied them at a hometown discount." "Convenient," I murmured. "There's more, but—" Stephanie glanced at the clock. "Not here. Too many ears." That weekend, Ryan and Melissa hosted a neighborhood barbecue. I watched Fletcher work the crowd, a tall, distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and a practiced politician's handshake. Everyone seemed to orbit around him, laughing too loudly at his jokes, nodding too eagerly at his opinions. When Fletcher approached Melissa, I noticed her body language change, shoulders hunching, eyes down, fingers gripping her plastic cup so tightly it cracked. When he placed a hand on her shoulder and leaned in to whisper something, her face went completely blank, like someone had switched off the lights. After the party, I followed Melissa to the bean counter, a coffee shop in the next town over. She sat at a corner table with 4 other women, all speaking in hushed, urgent tones. I couldn't hear their conversation, but their expressions told me enough fear, anger, resignation. That evening, Ryan cornered me in the kitchen. "Heard you've been asking questions around town," he said, blocking my path to the door. "About Fletcher Investments. About Chief Wallace." Just getting reacquainted with my hometown, I replied evenly. His jaw tightened. "You're not writing a story here, Audrey. This isn't Boston. We do things differently." "How's that?" "We look out for each other. We don't go stirring up trouble for people who've done a lot of good for this community." "People like Howard Fletcher?" Ryan's eyes hardened. "Especially people like Howard Fletcher. He's created jobs, rebuilt downtown, funded the hospital wing, the library renovation, and made himself and his friends very rich in the process." "That's called success," Ryan snapped. "Something you might understand if you hadn't run away the first chance you got." The next morning, I found a note tucked under my windshield wiper. Block letters, black marker, leave the past buried. When I showed Stephanie the note, she wasn't surprised. 3 women filed sexual harassment complaints against Fletcher in the past 5 years, she whispered as we walked along the river path, away from potential listening ears. All cases were dismissed. The files disappeared from the courthouse records, but I had already scanned them for the newspaper archive. What happened to the women? Lisa Winters, her husband's contracting business, suddenly lost all its accounts and went bankrupt. They moved away. Diane Fuller was fired from the bank for unrelated reasons. Grace Martinez still lives here, works at the hospital, but she won't talk about it. I stopped walking. And my mother? What's her connection to Fletcher? Stephanie's expression confirmed what I already suspected. The Fletcher Foundation has made substantial donations to the Millfield Women's Association for the past 12 years. Your mom is the treasurer. How substantial? Last year? $200,000. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. The mother who'd raised me to always tell the truth had been taking money from a predator. For what? Silence? Compliance? Protection? I needed to know why. My childhood bedroom transformed into an investigation hub. I pinned maps, photographs, and news clippings to the wall behind my bed, connecting them with red string. Howard Fletcher's smiling face was at the center of it all, a spider in the middle of a web that stretched across Millfield. Fletcher Investments, Fletcher Media Group, Fletcher Automotive, Fletcher Foundation. The tentacles of his influence reached into every aspect of town life. Ryan's construction company had secured contracts worth millions. Chief Wallace had quashed complaints against Fletcher. Judge Martin had dismissed lawsuits. Mayor Collins had approved zoning changes that doubled the value of Fletcher's properties overnight. And my mother, her signature on Fletcher Foundation, checks to community organizations, ensuring their loyalty and silence. I needed someone on the inside, someone who could provide documentation of Fletcher's methods. Jennifer Cooper, Fletcher's executive assistant, seemed my best option, young, new to town, possibly not yet fully indoctrinated into the system. I staged a casual encounter at Fletcher Investments' annual community picnic, accidentally spilling lemonade on her blouse. "I'm so sorry," I apologized, helping her dab at the stain. "I'm Audrey Mills, Ryan's sister." "Jennifer Cooper," she replied, her smile professional but guarded. "Mr. Fletcher's assistant." Over the next week, I engineered several more accidental meetings at the coffee shop where she picked up Fletcher's morning latte, at the dry cleaner where she dropped off his suits. Gradually, I worked the conversation around to my journalism background, my interest in corporate philanthropy. "It must be rewarding working for someone who does so much for the community," I suggested during our third encounter. Something flickered in Jennifer's eyes, doubt, fear, or maybe recognition of a potential ally. "Mr. Fletcher is very involved in local affairs." The careful phrasing told me everything. A week later, Jennifer accidentally bumped into me at the grocery store, knocking my basket to the floor. As we both knelt to gather spilled items, she slipped a small flash drive into my hand. "I never gave you this," she whispered. "I was never here." That night, I plugged the drive into my laptop. It contained hundreds of files, emails, financial records, memos, recorded conversations. The evidence was damning. Fletcher hadn't just been influencing local officials. He'd been blackmailing them, threatening them, paying them off directly. Monthly payments to Ryan's personal account labeled as consulting fees. Transfers to Chief Wallace's offshore account. Property deeds showing Judge Martin's vacation home had been purchased through a Fletcher shell company at 1/3 its market value. And my mother regular deposits into her personal account labeled as community liaison stipends. The next morning, I confronted her in the kitchen while Ryan was at work. "What does Howard Fletcher pay you for, Mom?" I asked, placing bank statements on the counter. The color drained from her face. She glanced at the papers, then turned away to fiddle with the coffee maker. "Those are donations for community work. I coordinate between the foundation and local organizations. They're deposited into your personal account, not the Women's Association account." Her hand shook as she poured coffee. "It's compensation for my time. Everything's perfectly legal." Howard's attorney drew up the contracts. "What does he really pay you for? Silence? Access to Ryan? To me?" The mug slipped from her hand, shattering on the tile floor. "You don't understand, Audrey. Howard Fletcher made this town what it is. Without him, we'd still be dying after the factory closures. He brought jobs, investment. He also brought corruption, intimidation, and God knows what else. 3 women filed harassment complaints against him. Disgruntled employees looking for a payday. She snapped, suddenly defensive. Howard explained all that. Did he explain why the complaints mysteriously disappeared from court records? Why the women were all run out of town? You're making something out of nothing, just like you always do. She began frantically sweeping up ceramic shards. This is why you couldn't keep your job in Boston. You see conspiracies everywhere. That afternoon, Stephanie texted me. Lost access to archive room. Boss says Fletcher files off limits. Something's happening. I drove to the outskirts of town and parked where I could observe Fletcher's estate. After 2 hours, I saw his black Mercedes leave the property, heading toward the lakeside. I followed at a distance, watching as he pulled into an abandoned boat launch area. Chief Wallace's unmarked police cruiser arrived 5 minutes later. I used my telephoto lens to capture images of money changing hands, of documents being reviewed. The men looked nervous, constantly scanning their surroundings. As I was leaving, a black SUV sped around the corner, forcing me onto the shoulder. It missed my car by inches, then accelerated away. I couldn't see the driver, but the message was clear. I was being watched. When I returned home, something felt wrong. Items on my desk had shifted slightly. My laptop wasn't exactly where I'd left it. Opening my investigation folder, I discovered files had been accessed while I was gone. That night, I heard Ryan and Mom arguing downstairs. She knows too much already, Ryan hissed. I saw her wall. She's connected Fletcher to everything. What did you take? Mom asked. Photos. Needed to show Howard what we're dealing with. My blood ran cold. My own brother had invaded my privacy, stolen my work, and delivered it to the man I was investigating. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd expected. Despite everything, some childish part of me had still believed Ryan would choose family over Fletcher when pushed. I was wrong. The first thing I noticed when I woke up was the silence. My laptop, usually humming softly on the nightstand, was completely dead. When I finally got it to boot, everything related to Fletcher was gone. Documents, photos, notes, emails, even my cloud backups had been wiped. Professional job. Someone with serious tech skills had remotely accessed my computer overnight. Fortunately, I'd kept physical copies of the most important documents hidden in a waterproof container buried beneath the garden shed. Jennifer didn't respond to my texts. When I drove past Fletcher Investments, her car wasn't in its usual spot. I tried calling, but her phone went straight to voicemail. After work hours, I went to her apartment complex. The property manager was changing the locks on her door. Miss Cooper, he said when I asked about her. Moved out yesterday. Middle of the night, no notice. Did she leave a forwarding address? He shook his head. Paid the lease termination fee in cash. Left the keys in the Dropbox with a note. I persuaded him to let me look inside. The apartment was completely empty. No furniture, no personal items, nothing in the closets or drawers. It was as if Jennifer Cooper had never existed. That evening at dinner, Ryan watched me with thinly veiled hostility. Melissa kept her eyes down, barely speaking. Only Lily seemed normal, chattering about school and her friends. Audrey was asking about Howard Fletcher at the grocery store, Ryan announced suddenly, cutting through Lily's story about a classroom turtle, implying he's done something wrong. Mom's fork clattered against her plate. Audrey, really? After everything Howard's done for this town? Like what? I challenged. Buying influence, harassing women, destroying anyone who stands against him? Ryan slammed his hand on the table. That's enough. You come back here after 10 years, knowing nothing about how things work, and start throwing around accusations. I know Jennifer Cooper disappeared yesterday. I know women who file complaints against Fletcher lose their jobs, their homes, their reputations. You're completely fucking crazy, Ryan snarled, making Lily flinch. You always have been. Remember your investigation in college? The professor you accused of giving grades for favors? You nearly got expelled. Because the dean was his golf buddy, I shot back. just like Fletcher is yours. Ryan stood up, towering over the table. You need help, Audrey. Professional help. You're seeing conspiracies that don't exist. Ryan, Melissa whispered, reaching for his arm. Not in front of Lily. He shook her off. No, Melissa. She needs to hear this. My sister has a history of these paranoid episodes. In college, in her first journalism job, and now here. She can't hold a job because she makes enemies everywhere she goes. Mom nodded, refilling her wine glass. We're worried about you, honey. I found a wonderful psychiatrist in Hartford. Dr. Levine. He specializes in delusional disorders. The ambush was so perfectly coordinated, I almost had to admire it. They'd planned this, waiting for the right moment to undermine me, to paint me as unstable. Later that night, as I updated my investigation notes, Stephanie called. I've been fired, she said without preamble. Official reason is budget cuts. But my boss told me off the record to stop helping you. Said Fletcher's people are watching both of us. I'm sorry, Steph. This is my fault. No, she said firmly. It's Fletcher's fault. But Audrey, be careful. When I left the building, someone followed me home. A black SUV. Same one's been parked across from my house all evening. After we hung up, I noticed a strange reflection on my water glass, a tiny pinpoint of light from the ceiling vent. Climbing on a chair, I examined the vent and discovered a small camera tucked inside. Its lens focused directly on my desk. My heart pounding, I searched the rest of the room, finding 2 more cameras, one in the bookshelf, another disguised as a smoke detector. Using a technique I'd learned from a surveillance expert I'd once interviewed, I removed the devices without damaging them, then placed them in a drawer where they would see and hear nothing useful. The violation hit me on a visceral level. My childhood home, my private space nowhere was safe. Someone had entered while we were at dinner, installed the cameras, and left without a trace. The message was clear. We can get to you anywhere. I needed a secure location for my investigation, somewhere they wouldn't think to look. The answer came to me as I stared out the window at the overgrown backyard, the old boathouse by the creek that ran behind our property. Ryan and I had used it as a clubhouse as children, but it had been abandoned for years after a flood damaged the foundation. That night, while the house slept, I transferred my essential files to a waterproof case and made my way through the darkness to the dilapidated structure. The padlock was rusted but still functional. Inside, cobwebs draped from the rafters, and the musty smell of decay filled the air, but it was dry, hidden from sight, and, most importantly, mine. I set up a small battery-operated lamp and pinned my reconstructed investigation map to the wall. It wasn't comfortable, but it was safe. Or so I thought. The next morning, I came down to breakfast to find Mom and Ryan huddled together at the kitchen table, looking through my phone. "What are you doing?" I demanded. Mom jumped, nearly dropping the device. "Audrey, I found your phone in the bathroom. I was making sure it wasn't wet." The bathroom was in the opposite direction from the kitchen, and my phone had been charging beside my bed all night. Another lie. Another betrayal. Ryan didn't even bother with pretense. "Who's Michael Reynolds?" he asked, scrolling through my recent calls. "Why are you talking to a disgraced ex-cop?" "That's private," I said, snatching my phone back. "Not when you're dragging our family into your delusions," he retorted. "Not when you're putting all of us at risk." The words sent a chill through me. He wasn't denying Fletcher's crimes, he was warning me about the consequences of exposing them. Lisa Winters lived in a rundown apartment complex in Harborville, 30 miles from Millfield. The woman who answered my knock looked nothing like the confident real estate agent from the complaint file photo. Her blonde hair had dulled to gray, deep lines etched her once pretty face, and her eyes held the wary look of someone expecting bad news. "Whatever you're selling, we can't afford it," she said, starting to close the door. "I'm not selling anything," I explained quickly. "I'm investigating Howard Fletcher. I know about the complaint you filed." The color drained from her face. "Go away. Please. We've been through enough. Lisa, please. Other women are being hurt. I can help, but I need." "You can't help," she hissed, glancing nervously at the parking lot. "No one can. Do you know what he did to us? My husband's business, our home, our credit rating all destroyed. We lost everything. Tell me what happened, I urged. Her eyes filled with tears. After I filed the complaint, the bank called in our business loan. Our clients canceled contracts overnight. Building inspectors showed up daily, finding code violations that hadn't been issues the week before. The newspaper ran a story about questionable business practices at my husband's company. Fletcher orchestrated all of it? She nodded. He visited me personally. Said he could make it stop if I withdrew my complaint and signed an NDA. Said otherwise, we'd never work in the Tri-County area again. Her voice broke. We didn't sign. We thought the law would protect us. We were wrong. Diane Fuller proved even harder to reach. After losing her position at Millfield Bank, she'd moved to Boston and changed her name. It took 3 days of persuasion before she agreed to meet at a coffee shop halfway between our cities. I was stupid, she said, her fingers nervously shredding a napkin. The Christmas party at Fletcher Estate. Too much champagne. Howard offered to show me his art collection upstairs. The story that followed was painfully familiar isolation, unwanted advances, a struggle, threats if she told anyone. I reported it anyway, she said with a hint of pride. Filed a police report the next day. Chief Wallace himself took my statement, promised a thorough investigation. But nothing happened. Worse than nothing. The report disappeared. I was fired for unrelated performance issues. My landlord suddenly terminated my lease. My car was vandalized repeatedly. She looked up, eyes hard with anger. The message was clear. Fletcher owns this town, and no one testifies against the owner. Grace Martinez was still in Millfield, working as a nurse at County Hospital. Unlike the others, she agreed to help immediately. I've been waiting for someone to finally stand up to him, she said as we sat in her living room. Her husband Miguel kept watch at the window, scanning the street for unfamiliar vehicles. There are more of us than you know. At least 15 women over the past 20 years. 15? I gasped. How has he gotten away with it for so long? Money. Power. A system designed to protect men like him. Grace's face hardened. And fear. He doesn't just threaten the victims, he threatens their families, their livelihoods. Most women decide it's not worth the fight. But you fought. She nodded. Filed a complaint with HR, with the police, with the state labor board. All disappeared. Then my son was expelled from the private school where Fletcher is the main benefactor. My husband's restaurant lost its liquor license over a paperwork error. Our house was suddenly reassessed at double its value, tripling our property taxes. Yet you stayed in Millfield. This is our home, Miguel said firmly. We won't be chased away by a predator. Grace introduced me to other victims who had remained silent, a teacher, a nurse, a bank teller, a waitress. All shared similar stories of harassment, followed by intimidation. All were willing to speak now, if they could do so safely, as part of a larger group. My phone rang as I was leaving the Martinez home. Unknown number. Miss Mills? My name is Michael Reynolds. I was a detective with Millfield PD until 3 years ago. We need to talk about Howard Fletcher. Reynolds, a weathered man in his 60s, met me at a fishing spot 20 miles outside town. He brought a sealed box of documents. I investigated Fletcher for 2 years, he explained, showing me case files, witness statements, financial records, sexual assault, bribery, blackmail, money laundering. Had enough to bring charges. What happened? Chief Wallace happened. Ordered me to drop the case. When I refused, evidence started disappearing from the locked evidence room. Witnesses recanted. My personnel file suddenly contained complaints I'd never seen. He shook his head bitterly. Finally told me to take early retirement or face an internal affairs investigation for evidence tampering, the very thing they were doing. Why are you helping me now? Because Fletcher's gotten bolder. That journalist who disappeared 12 years ago, Thomas Reed? He was investigating Fletcher too. And your father's accident? He paused, watching my reaction. You never thought it was suspicious? My father had died when I was 12, a single car crash on a rainy night. The official report cited excessive speed and wet conditions. What are you saying? I can't prove it, Reynolds admitted. But your dad and Reed were friends. They were looking into Fletcher's first big development deal. The one that got him started. 2 weeks later, your dad's brakes failed on Dead Man's Curve. The revelations staggered me. All these years, I'd accepted the official story, never questioning why my cautious father would speed on a rainy night, on a road he knew like the back of his hand. I was still processing this when my phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. Need to talk. Alone. About Howard. We met at the playground while Lily was at school. Melissa's hands shook as she pushed an empty swing back and forth. Ryan doesn't know I'm here, she began. He'd be furious. He thinks he's protecting me. From Fletcher? She nodded, tears welling. Before we were married, I worked as an event coordinator at Fletcher Estate. Howard cornered me during a fundraiser. When I rejected him, he became aggressive. Did you report it? I tried. The police refused to take my statement. Ryan found out, confronted Howard. There was almost a physical fight. She looked away. Then Ryan changed. Started working directly with Fletcher. Said it was the only way to protect me. To protect our future family. By enabling a predator? He doesn't see it that way. He thinks he's navigating a broken system, making the best of a bad situation. Her voice dropped to a whisper. The bruises you saw? Ryan gets so angry sometimes. Not at me at the situation. At Fletcher. At himself. But I'm the one who bears the marks of his frustration. Melissa, that's not. I know, she cut me off. I know it's not right. None of this is right. She squared her shoulders. That's why I want to help you. For Lily's sake. I don't want her growing up in a town where men like Fletcher can hurt women without consequences. That evening, Stephanie appeared at my door. Her face pale but determined. I salvaged these before IT wiped my computer, she said, handing me a flash drive. Court records. Property transfers. Tax documents. Everything showing Fletcher's influence over Judge Martin. The judge dismissed 3 harassment cases in exchange for a vacation home on Lake George. I hugged her tightly. Thank you. This could be the key. Be careful, Audrey. Fletcher's scared. Scared men are dangerous. Looking at the growing evidence and my small coalition of allies, I felt a surge of hope. We were finally making progress. The truth was coming together piece by piece. I had no idea how quickly it would all fall apart. The legal notice arrived by courier the next morning, a cease and desist letter from Fletcher's attorneys, demanding I stop all investigation activities, threatening a defamation lawsuit seeking damages of $5 million. Mom found me at the kitchen table, staring at the document. What's that? She asked, peering over my shoulder. When she saw Fletcher's name, her face hardened. What have you done now? Nothing yet, I replied. But I'm going to. She snatched the letter from my hands. This is serious, Audrey? He could take everything you have. Everything we have. He already has, Mom. He's taken this town's soul. He took Dad. Her hand trembled. What are you talking about? Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Chief Wallace stood on the porch, 2 officers flanking him. Audrey Mills? He asked, though he knew perfectly well who I was. I'd like to ask you some questions about allegations you've been making against Mr. Howard Fletcher. Mom ushered them into the living room, offering coffee and her best hostess smile. This is all a misunderstanding, Chief. Audrey's been under a lot of stress lately. Wallace ignored her, focusing on me. We've received reports that you've been harassing Mr. Fletcher's employees, trespassing on private property, and making defamatory statements that could constitute criminal harassment. Who filed these reports? I asked. That's confidential. His smile didn't reach his eyes. But I'd advise you to cease all contact with Fletcher Investments and its employees immediately. Or what? You'll arrest me for asking questions? For doing my job as a journalist? Your credentials are from Massachusetts, not Connecticut, Wallace replied smoothly. And journalism doesn't include stalking or defamation. After they left, my phone rang. It was Melissa, her voice tight with fear. I can't help you anymore. I'm sorry. Before I could respond, she continued in a rush. Howard approached Lily at school yesterday, told her what a pretty little girl she is, how she should visit his estate to see the ponies. Said he's always watching out for her. My blood ran cold. Melissa, No, she cut me off. I'm done. Ryan was right. There's no fighting this. Not when he's threatening our daughter. That evening, I tried to leave for a meeting with Michael Reynolds. Ryan blocked the front door. Where do you think you're going? He demanded. Out. Move. Not happening. He crossed his arms. Mom and I agree you're not in a state to be driving around making accusations. You can't keep me prisoner in this house. I'm protecting you from yourself, Audrey. Fletcher's lawyers are serious. They'll destroy you financially if you don't back off. Like Fletcher destroyed Dad? I challenged. Ryan's face paled. What are you talking about? Dad and Thomas Reed were investigating Fletcher's first development deal. 2 weeks later, Dad's brakes failed. That's insane, Ryan hissed. But doubt flickered in his eyes. Dad's death was an accident. You're connecting dots that don't exist. Then why did 3 separate mechanics tell me that type of brake line doesn't just fail? Why did the police report disappear from county records? Mom appeared in the hallway, a tumbler of vodka in her hand. That's enough, Audrey. Your father's death was a tragic accident. I won't have you turning it into one of your conspiracy theories. We should consider the psychiatric intervention, Ryan said to Mom, as if I wasn't standing right there. Dr. Levine said he could arrange an emergency evaluation. I think you're right, Mom agreed, her speech slightly slurred. This is worse than her episode in college. The betrayal cut deep. My own family, plotting to have me committed rather than face the truth about Fletcher. That night I slipped out my window and made my way to the boathouse. Michael Reynolds was waiting, looking grave. Fletcher's men attacked me outside my apartment, he said, showing me a nasty gash on his forehead. 2 guys in ski masks. Said next time they'd aim lower. We need to accelerate our timeline, I told him. Fletcher's getting nervous. He's threatening children now. The FBI contact I mentioned. He's interested, but we need more solid evidence connecting Fletcher to illegal activity. The financial records, the blackmail, the intimidation, it's all circumstantial without direct testimony. I explained how Melissa and other witnesses were now too frightened to come forward. What about Jennifer Cooper? Reynolds asked. Any sign of her? Nothing. It's like she vanished into thin air. The next morning, Stephanie called in a panic. Someone broke into my apartment last night. Took my laptop, external drives, everything with Fletcher's name on it. Left this. She texted a photo, a child's doll with a noose around its neck. Grace Martinez reported similar intimidation her son followed home from school, photos of her daughter's bedroom window left on their car. Other witnesses withdrew their support one by one, too terrified to continue. My investigation was collapsing. Every ally silenced. Every piece of evidence stolen or destroyed. I returned to the boathouse to regroup, only to find the door splintered open, the interior ransacked. My files were gone, my evidence board destroyed. On the wall, someone had spray-painted a simple message. Last warning. Defeated and exhausted, I sat among the ruins of my investigation. Maybe Ryan was right. Maybe I was seeing conspiracies where there were only coincidences. Maybe Fletcher was just a successful businessman who'd made enemies along the way. Then, I remembered Jennifer's flash drive, not the one with financial records, but the original one she'd slipped me in the grocery store. I'd kept it separate from my other evidence, hidden in a waterproof match container buried under a specific floorboard in the boathouse. It was still there. Plugging it into my phone, I discovered it contained more than financial records. Hidden in a subfolder labeled Insurance was Jennifer's personal journal, a detailed account of Fletcher's crimes, including dates, locations, and witnesses. The final entry, dated the day before she disappeared, made my blood run cold. Fletcher talked about Reed again today. Drunk, bragging about problems that solve themselves. Said Reed got too close to the Cambridge deal, started connecting Fletcher to the shell companies. Fletcher laughed about how easy it was to make an investigative journalist disappear. Just like Mills 20 years ago. I think he's planning something for Mills' daughter, too. God help me, I can't be part of this anymore. Thomas Reed hadn't just disappeared. Fletcher had killed him and my father before him. This wasn't just about harassment or corruption anymore. This was murder. I couldn't go home not with Ryan and Mom conspiring against me. Instead, I checked into a motel under a false name, paid cash, and spent the night connecting the new pieces of the puzzle. Thomas Reed had been investigating Fletcher's Cambridge development project 12 years ago, a luxury condo complex built on land that had previously been designated as protected wetlands. Reed was looking into how the environmental restrictions had suddenly been lifted, allowing Fletcher to purchase the land for pennies on the dollar. According to Jennifer's notes, Reed had traced the shell companies Fletcher used to bribe officials and launder money. Then Reed disappeared. His car was found at a bus station, but security cameras mysteriously malfunctioned that day. The police ruled it a voluntary disappearance. Case closed. And 20 years ago, my father had been investigating Fletcher's first major project, the Riverside Plaza that transformed downtown Millfield. Dad had been asking questions about the original property owners, elderly residents who sold their historic homes for far below market value after a series of accidents and vandalism. 2 weeks later, his brakes failed on a road he'd driven hundreds of times. The pattern was clear now. Anyone who threatened Fletcher's empire disappeared or died. Jennifer Cooper had realized she might be next and fled, but not before leaving evidence that could bring Fletcher down. I needed more concrete proof connecting Fletcher to my father's death and Reed's disappearance. Something that even Chief Wallace couldn't make disappear. The answer came unexpectedly. In Jennifer's journal, she mentioned Fletcher keeping old records in his hunting lodge, a remote cabin in the woods, rarely used but maintained as a private retreat where he could conduct business without interruptions. The cabin was isolated. With minimal security, Fletcher relied on its obscurity for protection. I could break in, find the evidence, and be gone before anyone knew I was there. But first, I needed access to our attic. Dad had been an avid fisherman, and I remembered him keeping detailed logs of his fishing trips. If he'd been investigating Fletcher, he might have hidden information among those innocent-looking records. Returning to the house when I knew Ryan would be at work and Mom at her volunteer shift, I retrieved Dad's old fishing gear from the attic. The equipment was dusty and brittle with age, but the waterproof tackle box was intact. Inside, beneath layers of lures and weights, I found a false bottom, and under that, a small notebook and a flash drive sealed in a plastic bag. Dad's handwriting filled the notebook observations about Fletcher's early business dealings, names of officials who'd received payments, details about the Riverside Plaza property acquisitions. And on the flash drive, scans of documents proving Fletcher had used threats and sabotage to force elderly residents to sell. The final entry, dated 3 days before his death, was chilling. Fletcher confronted me today, said to drop it or accidents happen, called Reed to warn him, need to secure evidence in case something happens. The truth hit me like a physical blow. Dad had known he was in danger. He'd tried to protect his evidence, to ensure Fletcher would eventually face justice. As I sat there processing this revelation, I heard the front door open. Mom's voice called out, "Audrey? Are you here? Your car's outside." I stuffed the notebook and drive into my pocket and hurried downstairs. Mom stood in the living room, her face a mask of surprise and dismay. "What are you doing here? Ryan said you'd disappeared." "I came for Dad's things," I replied, watching her carefully. "His fishing records." Her hand flew to her throat. "Why would you want those old things?" "Because Dad was investigating Howard Fletcher before he died. Because his death wasn't an accident." Mom's face crumpled. She sank onto the sofa, suddenly looking every one of her 59 years. "You don't understand," she whispered. "Then help me understand, Mom. Why have you been protecting the man who killed Dad?" Tears streamed down her face. "Howard said it was an accident. That Robert swerved to avoid a deer, that the brake line rupturing was coincidental." Her voice hardened, but I knew. Deep down, I always knew. "Then why take his money? Why help him cover up his crimes?" She looked up, her eyes desperate. "Because he threatened to do the same to you and Ryan. Said he'd make it look like an accident, just like Robert's. Said no one would question 2 more tragedies in the Mills family." She buried her face in her hands. "I was protecting my children the only way I knew how." The revelation staggered me. All these years, I'd thought Mom had sold out, had chosen Fletcher's money over justice for Dad. But she'd been trapped. terrified for her children's lives. "Mom, we have evidence now. Dad's records, Jennifer Cooper's testimony. We can stop Fletcher." Her eyes widened with fear. "No, Audrey. You don't know what he's capable of." "I know exactly what he's capable of. That's why he needs to be stopped." Before she could respond, the front door burst open. Ryan stood there, his face contorted with rage. "I knew you'd come back here," he snarled. "I told Fletcher's security to watch the house." "You're working with Fletcher's security now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "The man who killed Dad? Don't start with that again. Dad's death was an accident." "Tell her, Mom," I urged. "Tell Ryan what Fletcher threatened to do to us." Mom's face went blank with terror. "I don't know what you're talking about, Audrey." "You're confused again." Ryan crossed the room in 3 strides and grabbed my arm. "This stops now. Where's your investigation material? Where's your evidence?" "Let go of me, Ryan. Not until you tell me where it is." His grip tightened painfully. "This affects all of us, Audrey. My business. My family's safety. Your business built on Fletcher's blood money?" I pulled away. "How many women has Fletcher hurt while you looked the other way? How many lives has he destroyed with your help?" Something in Ryan's eyes shifted: guilt, doubt, shame. His grip loosened slightly. "It's complicated." "It's really not. Fletcher killed Dad. He's been terrorizing this town for decades. And you've helped him do it." The sound of tires on gravel interrupted us. Through the window, I saw Fletcher's black Mercedes pulling into our driveway. Mom's face went ashen. "He's here. God help us, he's here." Ryan looked panicked. "You need to give me everything you have on Fletcher. Now. Before he comes in." "Why?" I challenged. "So you can destroy it like you've destroyed everything else?" For a moment, indecision warred on Ryan's face. Then something hardened in his expression. "I've been trying to protect this family for years. Everything I've done has been to keep Mom safe, to keep Melissa and Lily safe. By enabling a murderer?" He flinched as if I'd slapped him. "I didn't know about Dad. Not until recently. Fletcher let something slip at a poker game about how unfortunate accidents sometimes solve problems. And you did nothing?" "What could I do?" he exploded. "Go to the police Fletcher owns? File a lawsuit with a judge on his payroll? He'd destroy everything I've built, hurt everyone I love." A heavy knock on the door silenced us. Mom moved like a sleepwalker to answer it. Patricia, lovely as always. Fletcher's smooth voice carried into the living room. "I understand Audrey's returned home. I'd like a word." As Fletcher entered, I slipped Dad's notebook deeper into my pocket. Whatever happened next, I needed to protect that evidence. Fletcher looked every inch the successful businessman: tailored suit, silver hair, perfectly coiffed, confident smile. Only his eyes betrayed him: cold and calculating, assessing me like a predator gauging its prey. "Audrey Mills," he said, extending his hand. "We haven't been formally introduced. Howard Fletcher." I ignored his hand. "I know who you are." His smile didn't falter. "I understand you've been conducting some sort of investigation into my business affairs. My attorneys are concerned." Just looking into some local history, I replied evenly. "My father's death. Thomas Reed's disappearance. Your pattern of silencing anyone who threatens your interests." Fletcher's expression remained pleasant, but his eyes hardened. "Tragic events, both of them. But accidents happen. People leave town for various reasons." He straightened his tie. "I'd hate to see more unfortunate incidents in the Mills family." The threat hung in the air, potent and unmistakable. Ryan stepped forward. "Howard, this has gone far enough. We agreed you'd let me handle this." Fletcher's gaze flicked dismissively to Ryan. "And you've done an admirable job, son. But some situations require a personal touch." He turned back to me. "I understand you're a talented writer, Audrey. I could use someone with your skills at Fletcher Media Group. Executive position, 6-figure salary, full benefits. All I ask is your discretion regarding certain historical matters." "You're offering me a bribe?" "I'm offering you an opportunity. The alternative is much less pleasant for you and your family." Before I could respond, the room erupted into chaos. The front door crashed open, and armed officers poured in, shouting, "Police! Everyone on the ground!" Chief Wallace entered last, looking grim. "Howard Fletcher, you're under arrest for the murder of Thomas Reed and Robert Mills." Fletcher's mask of confidence shattered. "This is absurd." "Wallace, what the hell are you doing?" "My job, finally," Wallace replied, nodding to an officer who began reciting Miranda rights. As Fletcher was handcuffed, I noticed Michael Reynolds standing in the doorway, accompanied by a man in an FBI windbreaker. "The flash drive you sent us contained exactly what we needed," Reynolds explained quietly. "Jennifer Cooper's testimony, plus your father's evidence, was enough for a federal warrant." "Jennifer's alive?" I asked, stunned. "Witness protection. She contacted federal authorities the day she disappeared." As Fletcher was led away, still protesting, Mom sank onto the sofa in shock. Ryan stood frozen, his face a battlefield of conflicting emotions. The FBI agent approached me. "Miss Mills, we'll need a formal statement about your investigation and the evidence you've gathered." I nodded, still processing the sudden resolution of a fight I'd thought we were losing. Justice had finally come to Millfield too late for my father and others Fletcher had hurt, but perhaps in time to prevent more victims. The healing, I knew, had only just begun. 3 days passed in a blur of FBI interviews, evidence cataloging, and media frenzy. Reporters descended on Millfield, like locusts, hungry for details about the prominent businessman's spectacular fall from grace. Federal agents combed through Fletcher's estate, hunting office, and hunting lodge, uncovering decades of incriminating records. The evidence was damning financial fraud, blackmail, bribery, and, most significantly, Fletcher's journal detailing his involvement in my father's death and Thomas Reed's murder. Fletcher's empire was collapsing like a house of cards. His associates scrambled to make deals with prosecutors, turning on each other to save themselves. Judge Martin resigned. Chief Wallace cooperated in exchange for a reduced sentence. Mayor Collins announced he wouldn't seek re-election. But within our family, the wounds were still raw and bleeding. I'd moved back into the house after Fletcher's arrest, establishing an uneasy truce with Mom and Ryan. We orbited each other cautiously, none of us ready to address the betrayals and secrets that hung between us. On the 4th morning, I found Ryan waiting for me in the kitchen, a recorder on the table between us. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "About Fletcher, about Dad, about everything." "Why the recorder?" I asked. "Because I want this on record, so I can never deny it, never take it back." He pressed the record button. "My name is Ryan Mills. I've been complicit in Howard Fletcher's criminal activities for the past 8 years." What followed was a full confession, how Fletcher had approached him after his confrontation over Melissa, offering a devil's bargain, help facilitate Fletcher's business dealings, and Melissa would be off limits. How Ryan had rationalized each compromise as protecting his family. How he'd suspected the truth about Dad's death but buried it beneath layers of denial. "I didn't want to believe Fletcher was capable of murder," Ryan admitted, his voice breaking. "Because if he was, that meant I'd been working for my father's killer. That I'd been taking his money, laughing at his jokes, inviting him to my daughter's birthday parties." "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, my own voice unsteady. "Because you deserve the truth. And because I'm turning myself in." He pushed a folder across the table. "This contains every document I have on Fletcher's operations, contracts, payments, meetings. I've already called the FBI. They're coming this afternoon." I stared at him, this stranger who was my brother. "You'll go to prison." "Probably." He met my gaze unflinchingly. "It's what I deserve." We sat in silence, the weight of his confession settling between us. Finally, I asked the question that had been haunting me. "Did you know Fletcher was threatening Lily? Using her to control Melissa?" Payne contorted his features. "Not until recently. Melissa finally told me last week. That's when I knew it had to end, that Fletcher would never stop, that no one was safe." He ran a hand over his face. "I've been so blind, Audrey. So fucking blind. I thought I was protecting my family, but I was just enabling a monster." Before I could respond, Mom appeared in the doorway, her eyes red-rimmed from days of crying. "I heard," she said quietly, The confession. Ryan nodded, unable to meet her gaze. I should have been stronger, she whispered. After your father died, I was so afraid for you both. Fletcher made it clear what would happen if I didn't cooperate. But that's no excuse. She straightened her shoulders. I'm going to the FBI, too. They should know about the payments, about Fletcher's threats. The sound of tires on gravel interrupted our family confession. Through the window, I saw Melissa's car pulling into the driveway, Lily in the back seat. Does Melissa know what you're doing? I asked Ryan. Yes. She's the one who convinced me it was time. His smile was sad but genuine. She's always been stronger than I gave her credit for. As Melissa and Lily entered the kitchen, the atmosphere shifted. Despite everything, they were still a family. Flawed, broken in places, but with the potential to heal. Aunt Audrey, Lily launched herself at me, wrapping small arms around my waist. Mommy says you caught the bad man who hurt Grandpa. That you're a hero. I had help, I said, meeting Melissa's gaze over Lily's head. The gratitude and respect I saw there meant more than she could know. The FBI arrived an hour later. Ryan and Mom gave their statements, handed over their evidence. The agents were professional, but encouraging their cooperation would be noted by the prosecutors. As Ryan was preparing to leave with the agents, he pulled me aside. I'm sorry, he said simply. For everything. For calling you crazy when you were right all along. For not protecting you the way a brother should. I thought of all the anger I'd carried, all the hurt and betrayal. It wasn't gone, healing would take time, but something had shifted. We protect each other now, I replied. That's how it should have been all along. After they left, I retreated to my room, emotionally exhausted. The investigation wall was still there, though I no longer needed it. Fletcher's crimes were now in the hands of federal prosecutors. Justice would be served through proper channels. I began taking down the photos and documents, ready to close this chapter of my life. As I removed a news clipping about Fletcher's first development project, I noticed something had been written on the wall behind it, words in a child's awkward printing. Daddy hurt Mummy. Uncle Howard watched. Lily's handwriting. The secret she'd been carrying, the reason Fletcher had been threatening her. She'd witnessed something no child should ever see. The final piece clicked into place. Melissa's bruises. Ryan's escalating anger and control issues. Fletcher's hold over them both. It hadn't just been about business or power. Fletcher had evidence of Ryan's abuse, using it as additional leverage to ensure his compliance. One more victim. One more layer of manipulation and control. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Turn on your TV now. I rushed downstairs, flipping on the living room television. Breaking news banner. Howard Fletcher had been found dead in his cell, apparent suicide. The camera cut to Fletcher's estate, where FBI agents were bringing out boxes of evidence. Behind the reporter, barely visible in the background, a dark figure watched from the tree line. Fletcher's son, Howard Jr., his face contorted with rage. My blood ran cold. Fletcher might be gone, but his legacy of violence and corruption lived on. The fight wasn't over. It had only entered a new phase. The psychiatric hold lasted 72 hours, 3 days of clinical lights, probing questions, and carefully documented observations. Fletcher's final act of vengeance had been set in motion before his arrest. An involuntary commitment order based on statements from my mother and brother about my delusional behavior and paranoid accusations. It might have lasted longer if not for Michael Reynolds and the FBI's intervention. Once they verified my claims and evidence, the hold was terminated with apologies from the hospital administration. I emerged into bright spring sunshine, where Stephanie waited in her battered Honda. Welcome back to the land of the sane, she said, hugging me fiercely. Though in this town, sanity's always been relative. The news about Fletcher's death had dominated headlines, followed quickly by the coordinated federal raid that dismantled his organization. Fletcher's associates scattered like cockroaches under sudden light, some cooperating with authorities, others fleeing jurisdiction, a few attempting to destroy evidence. Chief Wallace received a reduced sentence in exchange for his testimony about Fletcher's influence over the police department. Judge Martin resigned in disgrace. The mayor, 3 council members, and dozens of business leaders faced charges ranging from bribery to obstruction of justice. Ryan had surrendered voluntarily, providing prosecutors with detailed information about Fletcher's operations. His cooperation would likely reduce his sentence, but he still faced significant prison time for his role in Fletcher's financial crimes. Mom entered rehab the day after Ryan's arrest, finally confronting the alcoholism she'd used to numb her guilt and fear. Her weekly letters from the facility were painfully honest accounts of her journey towards sobriety and accountability. I returned to the family home to find Melissa and Lily packing. "We're moving to my sister's in Vermont," Melissa explained, folding sweaters into a cardboard box. "Fresh start. Away from Fletcher's shadow." And Ryan? Pain flashed across her face. "We're filing for divorce. The counselor says it's best for Lily." She hesitated, then added, "For me too." I helped them pack, carefully navigating around the ghost of my brother that haunted each room. Lily seemed lighter somehow, as if a burden had been lifted from her small shoulders. "Aunt Audrey," she said as we wrapped her collection of seashells in newspaper, "is Daddy a bad person?" The question caught me off guard. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that good people can do terrible things? That the father she loves made choices that hurt people, including her mother? "Your daddy made some big mistakes," I said finally. "He's trying to fix them now by telling the truth. That takes courage." She considered this seriously, then nodded. "Will we still see him? If that's what you want, he'll always be your dad." After they left, I stood in the empty house, unsure of my next steps. The journalist in me wanted to write Fletcher's story, expose every facet of his corruption and its impact on Millfield. But another part of me, perhaps the wiser part, knew I needed distance and perspective. The breakthrough came unexpectedly 6 months later. I was working at the Boston Globe, a position offered after my role in the Fletcher case became public when I received a call from Jennifer Cooper. "I'm out of witness protection," she said without preamble. "They found Thomas Reed's remains. Fletcher confessed to the murder in a letter he left behind." "And my father?" I asked, my heart racing. "That too. Detailed instructions on how his men tampered with the brake lines. It's over, Audrey. Really over." But it wasn't, not really. Fletcher's death had created a vacuum in Millfield, one that nature and human nature abhors. His son, Howard Jr., had stepped in, presenting himself as the reformer, the clean break from his father's corrupt past. But those of us who had fought Fletcher Sr. recognized the same cold calculation in his son's eyes, the same ruthless ambition. The battle for Millfield's soul continued, but now we fought with truth as our weapon. The local newspaper, under new ownership, reported aggressively on town politics. Citizens attended council meetings in record numbers. A new police chief, recruited from outside the county, implemented transparency measures and community oversight. And Ryan, serving his reduced sentence at a minimum security facility, founded a support program for men struggling with anger and control issues. His letters described his journey toward accountability, painful, humbling work that offered no easy redemption but perhaps a path toward being the man he should have been all along. Mom completed rehab and joined a survivors support group for families affected by Fletcher's crimes. Slowly, tentatively, we began rebuilding our relationship, not as mother and daughter in our old dysfunctional patterns, but as two women acknowledging past hurts while finding new ways to connect. On a crisp autumn day, I stood with Ryan, Melissa, and Lily at the newly discovered memorial for Thomas Reed. The journalist's remains had been found buried in the foundation of Fletcher's hunting lodge, concrete evidence of the lengths Fletcher had gone to silence those who threatened him. "He was Dad's friend," Ryan said quietly, placing flowers beside the simple marker. "I should have remembered that. Should have questioned why he disappeared so suddenly after Dad died. We were children," I reminded him. "You were 15, I was 12. The adults who should have protected us failed." "I failed too," he admitted. "When I grew up, when I had the power to stand against Fletcher, I chose the easier path." Melissa, who had driven Ryan to the memorial on a day pass from prison, touched his arm gently. Their relationship remained complicated, divorce proceedings underway, but a tentative friendship forming from the ashes of their marriage. "We all made choices we regret," she said. "The question is what we do now." What I did was write not a sensationalized exposé, but a thoughtful examination of how power corrupts, how systems fail, and how ordinary people can become complicit in evil through small compromises that accumulate over time. The book, Millfield, Anatomy of Corruption, became a New York Times bestseller and sparked conversations about similar dynamics in towns across America. I established a scholarship in my father's name for student journalists committed to investigating abuses of power. The first recipient was a young woman investigating corporate pollution in her rural community, someone who reminded me of my younger self, but with the support and resources I'd never had. 6 months after that day at Reed's Memorial, I received a job offer from the Washington Post. Their investigative team needed someone with experience uncovering corruption and withstanding pressure from powerful interests. It was my dream job, the platform my father would have wanted for me. The day before I left for Washington, I visited Dad's grave one last time. The autumn leaves crunched beneath my feet as I approached the familiar headstone, now supplemented with a plaque acknowledging the true nature of his death and his commitment to journalistic integrity. "We got him, Dad," I said softly, placing white roses against the cool granite. It took 20 years, but the truth finally came out. Wind rustled through the cemetery, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and coming frost. For the first time since returning to Millfield, I felt at peace with my father's memory, not just the sanitized version from my childhood, but the complex man who had risked everything to expose corruption. As I turned to leave, I saw Melissa and Lily approaching, their own flowers in hand. Behind them came Mom, walking slowly but steadily, her face both apprehensive and determined. We gathered at the gravesite, this broken family slowly finding its way back to one another. Not the same as before, we could never be that again, but perhaps something more honest, more resilient for having faced our darkest truths. We weren't crazy for wanting justice, I said, meeting each of their eyes in turn, only for thinking we had to face the monsters alone. In the gathering dusk, we walked together toward the cemetery gates, neither fully healed nor completely whole, but moving forward nonetheless. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in decades, it was free from Fletcher's shadow. That night, as I packed the last of my belongings for Washington, I glanced at my reflection in the bedroom mirror. The woman who looked back was changed, tempered by betrayal and loss, but also strengthened by truth and vindication. The real work of healing had only just begun, for me and for Millfield. But now, finally, it could happen in the light. What would you do if you discovered someone you trusted was hurting those around you? Would you have the courage to speak up, even if it cost you everything? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that they're not crazy for standing up to powerful people who cause harm. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, the truth may be buried, but it never stays hidden forever.